Hi, folks. Thank you, librarians, for coming today. Very excited to talk with Paul Tremblay about his book, Horror Movie. A little background. Paul is the author of 8 novels and many short stories. They have won the Bram Stoker Awards, a British Fantasy Award, and a Massachusetts Book Award. His novel, Cabin at the End of the World, was adapted into the Universal Studios film, Knock at the Cabin. An ardent defender of the genre, he suggested that horror is often judged by its least artistically successful works. That by design, horror holds up a mirror to society, challenging moral boundaries, comforting the disturbed, and disturbing the comforted. His most recent brilliant novel does exactly that. It's confounding, page-turning, disturbing, and very darkly funny. It's Nabokov meets Martin Amis meets the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and an artistic feat, utterly brilliant from first line to last. So Paul, please come on so people can see you.
Hey, well, thank you, Sarah. That's very kind. And thank you, librarians, the heroes of our day. Honestly, I don't say that lightly. They've been sort of thrust in that position to be the cultural sort of stalwarts, unfortunately. So thank you, librarians, for everything that you do. Thank you, Sarah. Geez, very
Yeah,
kind.
no, I thank you, librarians, very much for being here. And this horror movie is spectacular. It's spectacular. So congratulations on it. This is going to be an amazing talk. It's an incredible book.
Well,
Do you
thank
want to
you.
give a little background on it, or I can, whichever?
Oh, background, like a description kind of thing, or
Yeah, like a little
yeah.
log line.
Okay, sure. I'm so bad at log lines, but essentially, it's sort of a riff on a the cursed movie trope. So, but in 1993, a bunch of 20 somethings made made an indie, low budget, pretentious, disturbing art house horror movie, which is my favorite kind. Um, and the main story is being told by the man who played the Thin Kid back in 1993, because now 30 years later, they're trying to reboot the movie. And it bounces back and forth between what had happened on set because it never made it to screen, something terrible happened on set, and it bounces back to now where he's sort of dealing with some of the bad actors within Hollywood, the Hollywood system, not literal actors, but um, sort of
Producers,
producers and studios
directors,
and stuff like that. Yeah. So anyway,
sycophants.
I made it sound really exciting.
No, it's so good. It's so good. And the way that you play with time and narrative and an unreliable narrator, it's so propulsive and it's so smart. And it feels like House of Leaves, but short and 1,000 times more readable. Um,
Thank you.
yeah, I loved it. But I was thinking about the way that the story, to me, feels like it's a little bit about art and about losing control and being in a groove, and you don't know what's going to come out of it, what kind of conjuring will happen. So I wondered if there was anything that surprised you when you were writing the story.
Well, some of the things that surprised me, honestly, like I feel like I don't want to share because it would totally like spoil the story. Mainly because this was a novel that I didn't write like a plot summary first. I had like a general idea, but this was a lot more freewheeling than some of my other books where I did have it like a plot summary. So there were a lot of fun surprises how sort of all the tumblers fell in place at the end. That was a very surprising part to me. Um,
Really? You didn't,
yeah,
that took you by surprise? You didn't expect where it was going?
I mean, I sort of knew like the end, but like I didn't know. Yeah, I mean, there were some just like cool happenstances that like sort of like fit together. Um, stuff that had happened to the Thin Kid on set. There was like okay, that's what happened, or that's why that happened. Which is, I don't know, the fun of writing, like, because most of the time it's not fun. It's, I'm not gonna call it drudgery, but it's hard and like, you're just sort of like pecking away at it. And usually I keep like a couple of scenes in my head as like the carrot at the end of the stick scenes. Like I have to earn my way to there. Um, Honestly, the other surprise has been so far like the nice response my publisher has had to it, which is great. I'm very happy. But I was like, really, this book? It's really kind of grim and weird. Uh, yeah, and satirical, and I don't know, maybe it is in a mean way. I don't know, but I'm happy people have connected with it.
I would say the one thing about your work is that it's not satirical. I would say it's so heartfelt, everything you do. It's sort of, can I read this passage from the
Sure.
end or not then, there's a,
Mhm.
it's a passage from the book that I don't think gives anything away. I know that you saw it before.
Yeah.
It's about writing, and it says, what I love about it, as written and as it will be filmed, is that I honestly don't know what it means. That it makes me so uncomfortable, but almost joyously so. And it communicates emotions I can't simply describe with words. So I feel like that's my favorite passage because it feels like so much of your work is about that. It's sort of meeting people at this gut hindbrain level and speaking to something that we can't articulate with words. And it feels very much horror movie about right now, even though it never mentions about anything about the world. It's a
Yeah.
very closed story.
Yeah.
So was that any of that intentional? Was it just
Yeah. Thank you. I mean, that first, the passage you read, I appreciate that. I mean, to me, that's sort of like why I like horror or why I'm interested in it. But also, like, I was thinking about the comparisons of, fiction versus a movie, right? I mean, it's called horror movie and novel, but that juxtaposition. Whereas, I grew up just, I didn't become a reader until like my early to mid 20s. So like my first exposure to story was always film. Like I just was a loser kid who just watched the same movies over and over on cable TV for my first, 15 years, not counting ages 1 to 5. So that was my introduction to story. And the thing that as a older person discovering reading and discovering the joy of reading was I really like how books make you do a lot of the work and filling in those gaps. Or movies, movies can have some of that effect, but it's a much more passive. You're taking it all in. Um, Whereas movies, no, you're required to bring yourself to this piece in this like weird communication between the reader and the writer. Um, so like I've always like, and as a reader, like I'm terrible at remembering details, but I remember how books made me feel. Like that's the stuff that I remember. So my favorite stories, like, oh, like to me, they're almost like this set of emotions that I couldn't have explained otherwise was this book. Like, this is how this made me feel. Um,
I would say that a lot of horror is imitative of movies literature, and
yeah.
yours is expressly not. And it's kind of
Hmm.
fun to think that you grew up watching movies.
Well, thank you. I worry about, I mean, I used to worry more about it, but like, the ecstasy of influence to quote Jonathan Lethem. But like at some point, I think actually A Head Full of Ghosts for me as a writer, I was like, oh, you know what? It's okay to roll around in all these influences and play with them and put like your own voice into it and see what it, and, if you put it together, see what it looks like after that and ask questions about it, even if you don't necessarily know the answers. Um, yeah, I mean, to me, that's what horror is. Like, I've never been a fan of like, and I'm not judging others who are, but like, I mean, there's so many different kinds of horror. There's like revenge horror and sort of moralistic horror, and like that stuff never really, partly because, I live in a country where I have a lot of privilege, or maybe I don't need to see revenge upon, the people that have transgressed. I can understand people wanting to have that as a part of their horror. I don't know, but for me, like horror has been always been like, what the hell is this that we're living through? Like, those are the stories that I find a weird comfort in a way because I'm like, oh yeah, someone else feels this way too, and to me, that's an important feeling. Uh,
That's a
yeah,
hugely important feeling. It's why I read, I would say, and I hope why I write.
yeah,
But I kind of wonder, I get this question all the time, how does this help? Like I'll get like an angry person in the back who's like, but you're not fixing anything.
yeah,
And I'm like, I'm not. I know. And it almost gives me like a crisis of my job of like,
yeah.
well, am I supposed to go be a doctor? Like, or is my work supposed to change the world? I don't know. And what's your answer to that?
Yeah, I mean, mine would be like, well, I mean, does art fix things? I'd like to think it does. I mean, I'd like to think that art makes the world a much more palatable experience, but at the same time, I don't know. Like, George Saunders had a book that came out a couple years ago, "Swim in the Pond in the Rain," where he breaks down like these 7 great Russian short stories. And at the end, he's like, I'm going to horribly paraphrase, but it's like I'm always arguing if there's value in art and that it makes us better people, but like I don't know if it does. Like these beautiful stories were written in the 1800s, and then the absolute horror show that was the 20th century happened. Or maybe we wouldn't have survived the 20th century without art. I have no idea. So, like to answer that person's question as an individual, like I don't, there's so few people that can fix stuff. Like, I don't know what that even means or is. But what I guess the shorter version would be what I would like to think what happens is what we talked about, that communication. If someone, if you're reading something, you're like, hey, someone recognizes there's a problem. I think maybe more people are now more inclined to like go after that problem, as opposed to the sole person who's like, oh, maybe other people think this is fine, so I don't have to fix it or try to fix it. I don't know if that makes any sense.
It does. And there's also the opposite of like, what are they looking for? Are they looking for something that just makes them happy?
Right.
And I think that's very dangerous because it's telling you everything's okay. It's also telling you everything you think is okay. And I think to me, the point of horror is to tell people like the things you're afraid of are not the things you should be afraid of. You know, and I think you do that a lot.
Yeah.
And I
Well,
kind of
sorry, go ahead. I was gonna say I'm afraid of everything, so that part's easy.
I kind of wanted to ask you about nostalgia because I feel
Yeah.
like you sort of hit head on nostalgia in horror movie. Um, how do you feel about it? What role does the conceit play in your novel?
Yeah, it's kind of funny. Like get two books or two novels in a row anyway. Like I never think of my books as connected, but I always feel like I like to take a spark from the previous one. If nothing else, just to feel like I have like a leg up into the next thing. So Pallbearers Club certainly has 80s and 90s. I guess nostalgia to it, but my hope was like for both books, I hope people don't come away thinking, oh, that was such a great time to be alive. Like, no, like nostalgia is the lie. Nostalgia is what politicians use, weaponize against, millions and millions of people. Um, the idea that like, times were better then. I mean, in some ways they were, but in some ways they definitely were not. And there's no way you could mathematically equate like, the suffering that people's experience, in comparison to time. So yeah, so as cool as much as I enjoy sort of, displaying some of the, like the Gen X stuff, like the characters are talking about, but like hopefully it's not in a way it's like, oh yeah, these guys are cooler than us. So it's more of like, this is what they were thinking at this time. You may or may not sympathize with them, but hopefully you sort of understand like why they do what they're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's got a ghost world feeling to it too.
Mm.
I love that movie.
Yeah.
Um, the book also is kind of an act of conjuring to me. Um, as I read it, you're so skillful in bending reality, where the opening of the book feels grounded and there are rules. And as you move on, the rules start to break apart and things start to get confusing, not in a gut way, in a way that as a reader walks away, they're looking at their house in a different way. They're looking at their kitchen. It feels like the world has been changed and conjured in ways that are reflective of right now, reflective of this weird post-COVID world where we haven't even acknowledged that we had COVID. And there's just this terrible rock no one's lifting up underneath. And I just wondered, was there anything that surprised you in the act of conjuring with this novel?
I don't know if it was a surprise, but like I definitely, or maybe a little bit of surprise, because when in the teeth of writing this book, the Russia-Ukraine war really had started like, there were multiple times where, horrified the whole time, as we are now with what's happening in Gaza, but like, there were a few times where just as a child of the 80s, I was like, is this going to lead to nuclear war? It still could. I have no idea. But like my own like personal, because, you and I have talked before. I know you like to watch all those movies. I can't watch anything related to nuclear weapons. It's just too, that for me, that's the thing I just can't handle. Like I cannot deal with it because I'm afraid that I'll go back to all the teenage nightmares I had of nuclear war and stuff like that. So as much as a surprise, I mean, I guess it's not a surprise that my real world feels we're seeping in a totally not didactic way. But I think that's there sort of in the, if some of the things are cruel that's happening, it's maybe because I wasn't feeling like the world was such a great place, and add an extra layer on top of it, like after having gone through the pandemic and everything else associated with it. There was that part of it too, I guess.
There's this great line halfway through the book where we leave a teenager's room and you wrote, and the teenager's room feels lonely because all teenagers' rooms feel lonely. I just wanted
Thank
to say
you.
I
Yeah.
liked
Oh,
it.
thank you. Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, part of it is that, so one of the conceits of the book too is that it includes the entire screenplay of horror movie. that was written at the time by, a 23, 24-year-old woman. And they're writing about teenagers. So to me, it was like, oh yeah, this was going to have like some certain teen angst, and so much of the Gen X '90s part, when I was like in my early 20s, like teen, that young adult or that young person angst was so much a part of the music and everything else. So, um, I felt natural to sort of have that part in there. Like just like with other, like my memories are terrible, like for details, but I think I still vividly remember my emotional life as a young teen and a teenager too. I think part of that's probably just reinforced because I've been around high schoolers my whole life
I think
as a
I've
teacher.
repressed mine. You're actually really good at it because I'm like,
Oh, thanks.
oh no, these feelings.
Yeah,
Because what you
yeah,
capture also is that the loneliness, but also this being on the precipice of something huge, and the notion in adolescence that your potential could go anywhere, and it's scary, and you're living in a house that you're not going to be living in for much longer, and you're looking at the people around, judging
yeah,
them.
right. And the scariness is still kind of cool in a little way at that age, I feel like. Whereas now as like old people, I'm not gonna age you. I just feel like it's just like bad scary. It's just not fun scary. Or it's just like I've
Yeah.
been beaten down scary. I'm like, there's nothing I can do. Yeah.
We also have people to take care of too.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
different, yeah, yeah. Um, did you have a favorite character?
I mean, I did really, I kind of enjoyed all like the main ones. I mean, the Thin Kid was a lot of fun. Uh, and another sort of nod to Pallbearers Club, if anyone read that. I mean, he's physically described very similar to Art Barbara, but much different. So it was kind of fun to have. It was fun to have a character, especially when he was going through the modern stuff with producers, to have someone say the things to the producers that I'd never said out loud, but was clearly thinking them at times. Um, and everything that's in the book when I reference producers isn't all things I've experienced. Their experience, they've been experience other writers and friends we have that experience. Because we novelists don't have a union to protect us. All we can do is like take a modicum of revenge in our books, maybe. Uh, yeah. So I mean, so that part was fun. I think I really connected with Cleo just in the writing of the screenplay and her as well. Geez, I mean, now I'm thinking about it, there's so many connections between this book and Pallbearers, because I mean, this book to me is also a lot about like depression in a way too, whereas same was for Pallbearers Club. Um, yeah, so readers be warned. I guess there's some not so not so fun thoughts about dark thoughts in that book or in this book too.
Well, I think we already said to everyone what happens, but the Thin Kid is pulled back in. He's been in the original movie from the 90s that wasn't
Right,
completed. Now he's pulled back in circa now
right.
and sort of dragged into the movie industry. But you have a scene where he's at Rock and Shock, which I've also been to. Do you want to
Yeah,
tell everybody about Rock and Shock at all, or?
yeah. So yeah, so like his yeah. Well, actually, I think it was Valentino went to Rock Show, but he went to Scares
Oh,
That Cares. Same
oh,
thing, but
sorry,
like,
it was Scares
but
That
no,
Care.
but there was definitely reference to Rock and Shock too. Yeah, Rock and Shock was this very strange, fun convention in Worcester where the people had the idea, like, oh, we're going to put these rock bands with horror movies because there's definitely yeah, I shouldn't say rock bands, usually metal bands, right? Because there's so much overlap. So they'd have like the B movie celebrities. They have some people selling books, but mostly selling like bootleg DVDs and stuff like that. But yeah, there's a couple of pivotal chapters where the Thin Kid is at a convention that's mixing writers and writers and actors from horror movies, which is a fun thing to go to. But on some level too, it's also just really strange, like strange in a fun way, but it's strange.
You feel like you're on sale. I mean, you go to all of these things and you've created this work and it's for sale. And you're supposed to stand in front of it and be like, here you go. And
Yeah.
and they'll come up to you, right? And they go like, pitch it to me. And you're like, ah.
Oh yeah, right. If people, yeah, and that would be the experience at Rock and Shock was, you had a few, no one who knew who you were, and you're trying to sell people books. Yeah, that wasn't a fun feeling. I think we're both happily in a different place Or maybe, I assume it's happily, like, where, people come because they know they've read our books, as opposed to us trying to sell people,
I
like,
still get that
directly.
all the time.
Yeah, yeah,
Pitch me. And I'm like,
yeah,
I
I
can't
know,
do it
yeah.
anymore.
No, I can't pitch. I mean, you heard me try to give, like, my log line for the book, and it was just a gook of a mess of a thing. I don't know, so the convention chapters were fun to write because, at heart, I'm a fan. Like, I mean, that's how I started. I mean, I still write from with a fan's heart. Like, when I read something that really excites me, uh, like A Better World, and I have a collateral hanging out right there so everyone can see, from Sarah's most recent novel, or, Mariana Enriquez's novel. Like, when I read something that really excites me, it makes me want to try to write something, and not like something like that, but just to try to hold on to that little spark that made me feel the way it did, and try to put that into my story somehow. I mean, um, that's
That's
how
how I feel
that's
about
kind of how I
horror
write.
movie.
Yeah. Well,
You
thank
know,
you.
I reread it and I was like, there's stuff I didn't see.
Look at
You
all these
know, there's
typos now
you
because you have
mentioned
a
a minotaur in there. I was like, I
yeah.
love minotaurs. Like there's so much, it's so meaty. And it's like this really simple story, but it's engrossing and it's complex. And it's like you could, and it's what I love. So what I love about the movie Chinatown
Yeah.
is it's genre, but it's huge and it's
Yeah.
about everything, but you can put it in a box and people understand it and they can understand it on all kinds of levels. And I feel like that's what you did with horror movie. And I think that's why
Oh,
people are
Jesus.
are hugely into it because it's
Yeah.
like it's both brilliant and artistically creative, but it's also we can just call it horror and it's going to satisfy every level. And I think that's what you did.
Oh,
So
wow. Well, thank you. I'm honored, to, so I do love Chinatown as well. Not too not too, I've read the screenplay for that a couple times, not too soon before working on a horror movie. Unrelated, but it was just like, oh, I want to try writing some screenplays. I should probably read one of the best ones. Um, but yeah, no, I think is just absolutely brilliant.
okay, we've got like a minute before I'm supposed to go to questions. So
Okay.
I have quick questions for you.
Yeah.
When you worked at Parker Brothers, did you work on Ouija boards?
Yes, I was what was called a material handler. So there was the assembly line. So I would have to bring like all the boards, so the people putting the boards in the game. So no, I was terrified of Ouija boards until I saw it mass produced. But I say that until I saw it, I still like don't play with them. My dad, I thought he was lying to me. He retold me a story because my father worked there for 25 years. He told it this weekend that he was working third shift, so overnight, and it was like 2 a.m. and somebody else said, "Hey, Bones," that was my father's nickname. You have to come here. Like, this woman is screaming about her Ouija board. She came back like at 2 a.m. Is like, this thing just started floating off my table. You guys have to take it. You have to take it from me. So I thought my dad was like pulling my leg when he told me that when I was a kid, but I mean, he was telling it to other. He's like, "No, that really happened. I promise." Yeah. So yeah, Ouija board. So I did help mass produce them. Sorry, world.
I freaking love Ouija boards. They're awesome.
Yeah, Lisa used to do them all the time. Maybe you and Lisa should mess around with a Ouija board. I'll stay out of
We'll be like, we solved it, Paul.
it.
There's guns everywhere.
Yeah.
Um, okay, we've got some comments. I love them all. But do we have any questions? I want to claim Paul as our Gen X literary horror icon, but he is just so damn good that he is universal. No one does fear outside thoughts with the sweetest emotional moments and realizes pickles are evil.
Thank you. Wow. Geez, did my mom write that? She wouldn't have thrown in the pickles. Well, thank you. That's very kind of you. And yes, I still hate pickles. Lisa tried to trick me into eating a pickle this past weekend. It was like, no, it's just a cucumber with some stuff on it. And I was like, no. I mean, it wasn't actually a pickle, it was something else, but I think it was too pickle adjacent. But
She just
anyway,
wanted
thank
to
you. That's very
see.
kind.
She wanted to help you, in
Well,
the event that you actually still like pickles now, but didn't know it.
I
Now
was
you
yeah, when she first met me, I was a super, super picky eater, and I've come so far. So there are a lot of things I eat now. She'd be like, "You like all these things now. Maybe you'll like pickles." I'm like, "No, I will not. I won't."
All right, next question. Which came first, the then, the now, or the screenplay?
Oh, great question. I wrote it as I went. Like I can't. I'm not someone. I wish I could like write it in the parts. Um, so I would like I wrote like whatever the chapter was, and I knew a screenplay piece was coming. So I didn't write the screenplay altogether first. I sort of wrote it in the order in which it appears in the book. With there was only one thing I moved up, like from draft. That I moved up maybe the first director piece a bit, but otherwise, like if it was time for then, I wrote then. If it was time for now, I wrote now. If it was time for a screenplay piece, I took a break. And to me, that's kind of the fun part of that formatting is like I feel like, oh, there's this built-in little difference, this built-in little break.
Okay. Same question. Oh, what's next? What are you working on next?
So I just turned in the edits. So I have a book for middle graders called Another that's coming out a year from now, next summer. I'm pretty excited about it. I'm not planning like a career pivot. I just happen to have the idea of this weird book where an old creepy guy shows up at a house with a burlap sack and he opens it as this like boy made out of clay that looks like a mannequin with like no, just like the silhouette of a face kind of thing to be a friend of this other kid at his house. But like when he shows up, like the mannequin will like make a smile on his face. Have you ever seen Mummenschanz, Sarah? Do you know what I'm talking about if I say
No.
Mummenschanz? There was like this Swedish performance troupe that was on like the Muppet Show, but there would be people in black leotards and a big lump of clay on their head, and they would fashion like a guy with a mustache. You can YouTube it. It's as a kid, it was like, wow, this is really cool, but also very creepy. So anyway, weird Mum and Chance inspired fiction.
What's
Um,
what's the name of it? Do you know
uh,
when it's going to be out?
yeah, it's called Another. It'll be, I think they said July of 25 or June of 25. Yeah, I think it's creepy as hell. Like, it was kind of fun to write a story. And I feel like my only like adult fiction things I had to like not give into because it serves a story. It's not ambiguous. And the kid has to overcome the horribleness. If I wrote as an adult novel, the kid would have been subsumed, but I'm glad I didn't write it that way.
But did you also write a YA book with Stephen Graham Jones?
Yeah, way back in the day, like 2010, it was a book called Floating Boy and the Girl Who Couldn't Fly. It's long out of print, and we wrote it under the name P.T. Jones.
That's
It was
that's awesome.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun to work with Stephen. Maybe we'll bring it back someday. We'll see.
All right. Regional debate on how to pronounce horror or horror or horror. Horror. How do you
Uh,
pronounce it?
I guess I say horror, but like if I'm like talking in an obnoxious Boston accent, horror, horror movie. But I say horror. I wish I had my mom on. She has the best Boston accent. I have her say horror. But that sounds close to New York City too, right? Or
New York is horror.
oh yeah,
Horror.
horror. Yeah.
And like, because whenever I would say I wrote horror, but I said it with my accent, people were like,
Yeah.
you're a what? That's not cool. Okay, I think we're at 10:25. So I think we should be wrapping up.
Yeah.
Do you have any last things you want to talk about? And I'm sorry for people's questions I didn't get to. I'm sorry.
No, I don't think so. Yeah, thank you. That was a lot of fun. That went really fast. I guess the only thing I should say is if you haven't read it yet, please get Sarah's A Better World new book. Everything she was saying about horror movie, apply that to her book. Except, there's not like horror and there is horror, but it's not that kind of horror. Um, no, it's wonderful. Like as I had said online, it's one of the books I've read this year or any other year.
Thank you. Well, congratulations, because you've written a brilliant book and it's going to do gangbusters. And I'm so glad everyone was here to hear about it because it's a book that needs to be read.
Thank you.
So thank you, librarians. And next up are two concurrent panels, Crime That Pays and Secrets Can Be Fun, Riddle-Filled Books.
Crime
Thanks,
pays,
everybody.
yes.
Bye.
Bye.